Morning, all. All right, so today, July 12th, 2021. Why, yes, this is a Kevin Hatcher jersey. Glad you asked. Today making the news is that Pierre McGuire has been hired as the Senior Vice President of Player Development, which has led to only positive vibes from the internet. No, it hasn't. I will say this. I'm going to say this. Pierre McGuire can be interesting to listen to on TV, right? So he won't be on TV anymore, working for the Sens. He said that he had basically, done his part for NBC, and once the NBC contract was done, then he's moving on. I don't know if he had other offers. We may not find out if he had other offers. I would think somebody would offer him a job as a color commentator, absolutely. But of course, immediately people are bringing up that he doesn't like analytics. And he does have this disdain for analytics in his commentary, and then he said he doesn't hate it when he was talking about being hired by the Senators, and says that it's not a replacement for real scouting, yada yada yada. And I get what he's getting at, but yeah, he does not like analytics. He even said that he believes a coach should be fired if they're just relying on analytics. I think honestly, when you're trying to get a picture of a player and how well a player is or isn't playing, I think you do have the eye test still is important. You do have the analytics. You do have basically the entire picture should be there. And general managers, coaches, it's on them to make sure that they know exactly how to get the best out of their roster. Sometimes with the analytics, I think that it also can show bad coaching. I think sometimes that it'll show poor decisions being made by a coach, players being overplayed or underplayed. I think there's a lot to be said for that. But I do think, and I know Brian Burke said this, it's part of the picture when you're trying to make decisions on players and on what you're going to do with your roster. But yeah, I don't think that Pierre McGuire can do any major damage to the Ottawa Senators as Senior Vice President of Player Development. And then, of course, Pierre Dorion gets asked, did you just hire your replacement as general manager? And he says no. I don't know that Pierre McGuire is going to end up being a general manager in the NHL. I would kind of be surprised if that did happen. But it'll be interesting to see how it goes in Ottawa. And, of course, Pierre says he believes that the Ottawa Senators are 3 players away from contending for a Stanley Cup. And I do think there's something to be said for that. At the same time, they look pretty good in the second half of the season in the North Division. And I don't know that they're as far off as some people might think. I think they're going to surprise some people next year. But we'll see. And again, as in charge of player development, or senior vice president with player development, I really don't see how that's going to harm things going forward. But again, the internet being the internet, you would think by some reactions that he'd been hired as general manager or assistant to the general manager. He would make the perfect white shirt, wouldn't he? Right? Absolutely. So, that being said, I wish all the best to he and to the Senators. I'm kind of tired of the Senators being at or near the bottom, so it'd be nice to see them moving up this year, and they should. So, TJ Oshie, the reason for the Caps jersey, has said that he's not been talked to by the Capitals regarding the expansion draft. So he's one of those players that's been tagged for the last year now as maybe he'd be a logical choice to go to Seattle, but he doesn't want to leave Washington. One of the reasons why people look at Oshie as being a potentially good pickup for Seattle, and maybe somebody that Washington would look to move out, is that contract, as long as it is, probably isn't going to age very well. And if you can find somebody who'll take on 100% of that contract, you probably do it. So we'll see whether or not Oshie is available and whether or not Seattle would pick him if he was. Now, on to other interviews that I just think, what else is he going to say? So Owen Power's been doing the rounds as the most likely pick for the number 1 spot in the draft. And while we hear, it could be Eklund, maybe Beniers ends up number 1. Reality is, it's very likely to be Owen Power. It'd be kind of a surprise if it wasn't him. And so one of the questions he's being asked on all this interview circuit is, what if Buffalo takes you? Will you go to Buffalo? And his answer is yes. Honestly, I'm trying to think of the last time I heard a player not say that he'd be willing to take whatever team drafted him. And I can't think of anybody since Lindros that's been the consensus number 1 who said, I'd rather not. Owen Power says he'd love to go to Buffalo, and I'm not sure what else people expect him to say. And I don't think that who drafts him necessarily will impact when he decides to go pro. Because the sooner you go pro, the sooner you're an unrestricted free agent, the sooner you have control over your surroundings and over all of that. So I don't see any reason why Power would necessarily want to throw shade at a team that might draft him and all of that. It's just weird because I don't know what people expect him to say. Not everybody can be shirtless downing Bud Lights. So, there's that. So I don't expect anything different from Power. I would expect that A, he gets drafted by Buffalo, and B, he probably ends up going back to Michigan. That's very likely what happens, unless Buffalo makes him an offer that he says, yeah, there's bonuses in this, and I'm going to take that but again, there's limits on that, right, with an entry-level contract. So we'll see. I'm going to say this too. There's a lot of rumors out there, and rather than put them all on the board, I'm just going to make it clear. I'm going to use the NHL Shield logo for this. Expensive players will be exposed in the draft. Expensive contracts will be exposed in the draft. Players who are nearing 30, a little bit over 30, they're going to be exposed in the draft if they make a lot of money, and teams want to get out from under those contracts. Odds are they've been working the phones, and teams have said, we don't want to take on that contract before the expansion draft because we don't want to have to protect another player or expose another player because we have to protect him, or expose that contract and end up seeing it go to Seattle for nothing. So odds are that Seattle will make their picks, and then after the expansion draft, we will see a lot of those expensive contracts then available for trade. The salary cap prior to last year's pause was expected to go up, and it was expected to go up substantially year after year after year. And it's not going to. We're going to see at least this upcoming season at $81.5 million, likely the following season at $81.5 million, and then we see where we're at the following year. And again, there's a lot of mechanics at work here when it comes to the salary cap that's going to keep it at the same amount of money, because they're not actually getting paid $81.5 million, and because of escrow and all the other short changes that are going on right now. They're not getting paid that amount of money. And the less they're getting paid now, the more money they owe later, because it's a whole NHL tied-in thing, right? So those expensive contracts are kryptonite to teams. They are contracts that at the time they were signed. It's funny because I can remember there were contracts being signed 3 years, 4 years ago that I would make a video and say, I don't know how this contract's going to age. And fans, and all credit to them, that we had no idea what was going to happen. Fans just said, look, the salary cap's going to keep going up. That contract may look bad now, but 3-4 years down the road, that contract's going to look cheap by comparison. And now it doesn't. So there are some general managers who, through no fault of their own, have found themselves in a position where they've got a contract or contracts that they're trying to get rid of. The problem is, it's about half the league where we have the exact same problem. So the buyout timeline is closing on July 27th. Between now and then, look for them to try to get Seattle to take contracts, look for them to try to get other GMs to take contracts, and then it could be, maybe, might be a very busy buyout season after that. Because teams, if they can't get rid of those contracts, a buyout may be the next move, because they want to improve their team headed into next year, and some of those contracts might be holding them back from doing that. So I would expect that probably some pretty useful players too. This may not just be an example of a bad contract with a player who's in severe decline. It may be a player who's playing well, but you can't justify the cost while he's playing well. So there might end up being a bit of a more robust UFA market than we're seeing right now. And then to close things out, Tampa Bay has been out partying. They've got these shirts. They're not NHL licensed. I want to point this out. They're not NHL licensed shirts. I did check because it shows right on the T-shirts. The $18 million over the cap shirt, and had enough of this BS. The other one, or something like that. Sick of this BS. Or that's just. Anyways, you guys know the shirts I'm talking about. They're not NHL licensed, so I know there's people that are going to see those shirts and go, "Wow, the NHL's making shirts saying $18 million over the cap." No, it's really, really brilliant marketing from a company that doesn't ship to Canada, because the one that was enough of this BS, or however that's phrased, I was like, I wouldn't mind that shirt. There are times where I could be wearing that under a jersey and be aware I'm wearing it, and that I kind of feel like something that happened in a game was BS or something else, something like that. I'm just having a bad day. That shirt would work, but yeah, they're not NHL licensed. The NHL is not making money on the whole idea of them being over the cap. And I will say this: the Bolts have embraced their role as supervillains in the NHL, which is not unusual for a team that's flirting with being a dynasty. Being supervillains is kind of part and parcel of it. I remember the Oilers back in the 80s, the Islanders back in the 80s, and yeah, they could play the supervillain roles pretty darn well. And they could lean into things as well, much like the Bolts are leaning into this. And, good on them for having fun with it. And I know it's going to make people rage. I've already seen it online where people are upset. But again, the NHL's not making those shirts. And the manufacturer of those shirts doesn't have Tampa Bay Lightning on the actual shirts. Because again, you have to watch that because that's trademarked, it's copyrighted, and you can get in some trouble. So they're skirting that line. They've not broken any of the copyright rules that I've seen, and those are fun. Those are because again, if you're gonna play the villain role, lean into it. Sure, no problem. I've watched. I know there was that one game I watched in Vancouver against the Bruins where Brad Marchand was playing the villain absolutely to a T in front of the crowd. And I don't know that any of it was caught on camera because I never saw highlights, but he was really egging on the crowd to make the boo him louder and louder. And, while on one hand I'm like, man, Brad, what are you doing? Because I'm going to have to leave and I'm wearing a Bruins jersey. You're probably making it worse for me. But on the other hand, I was thinking, you know what? He loves the villain role. And sometimes teams love playing that role as well. So good on the Bolts for doing that. So for Tampa, the party's on. I would think it's going to be partying all summer. Remember, no keg stands with the cup, though. Ovechkin ruined that for everybody. And, just careful with the cup. And, of course, for their parade, they also riled some feathers in that they had the Tampa Bay Buccaneers championship trophy, the Vince Lombardi trophy, which means that the Buccaneers gave it to them, because I've seen people saying, that's disrespectful to football players. Okay, the Buccaneers gave that to them. They gave them that trophy. It's not like they snuck into a high school and stole it, 80s sitcom style. So, anyways, there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.